Let's share the text. And close to the YouTube being set up. There we go. Just let me organize the view for everyone. Just waiting there for a second. There we are. Okay. Okay, looks like everything is moving. Just need to adjust the camera down a little bit. That's a little better. Centered in the screen. Got to have all the little details right. Yes, yes, of course. All right, well, we've hit our usual start, and so we're going to start. And in any event, before we get down to work, I have to discuss a few things. So we are going to dive into some work with the Mishnah and Talmud today, Gemara technically. And if you're not familiar with these texts, let me give you a little bit of a primer. So as we saw from our discussion of the biblical texts, texts that were taken from the Tanakh, mostly from the books of the prophets, there is a lot that is said about the future, a lot that is very reminiscent of what we saw in the Siddur, in the prayer book, in our first discussion, but not a clear timeline and not clear explanations, definitions, or other aspects. Now, that's not unusual. The Torah itself, as well as the Tanakh in its entirety, are not always written in a way that modern audiences find easily unpackable, that sometimes it feels like there are gaps, words unsaid, implications unexplored, or perhaps implications that we never imagined. Well, the Mishnah is the first compilation of that explanation of what God actually wants from us, focusing primarily on halacha, on the aspects of Jewish law, but also including many what we call agadic ideas, meaning many theological, philosophical, sociological, psychological, all of these types of things that are not directly one-to-one related to doing a mitzvah, doing an actual commandment, but nevertheless have a huge impact on how we see ourselves, how we see the world, and how we understand God. So the Mishnah attempts to pull in what was called the oral Torah, Torah Sheba'al Peh, meaning the explanation of the written Torah, Torah Shebichtav, and that had always accompanied it. The classic comparison I give for people in the modern world is if you wanted to learn how to drive a car, you would not get very far by just reading a book about driving a car. Yes, you would get many of the ideas, and the book would absolutely be 100% complete, but it's only 100% complete if you have somebody to explain what it means by all the different things that it says. There's only so much you can put into print. Much more will need to be expanded upon by a teacher to a student as they go, while still keeping perfect adherence to the actual rules, but catering the explanation to the individual student to make sure they fully comprehend. This happens in every field. 3 different teachers may teach algebra differently, even while still teaching algebra. And the Mishnah was the first written out attempt to put that oral explanation, that lesson plan, if you will, that helps unpack the Torah into bite-sized chunks that we all need in order to not only know what God wants, but to know the details of how to do that. Now, the Gemara comes along, the Talmud as is called in its totality, a few centuries later, with a continued explanation based upon the debates and discussions of the different sages of the implications of Jewish law and Jewish thought. And this is part of the ongoing process in Judaism, that the conversation is never actually done. That there is never a body of Jewish literature that you can simply memorize and then say you know everything, because everything is constantly being interpreted based upon the situation that is in. The details of the moment always weigh very heavily. So you can't just make blanket statements without understanding the particulars. However, within this body of literature, there are many blanket statements. And in particular, the blanket statements tend to be most common within the theological discussions, within the Agadah. Excuse me, which is what we're going to be looking at today. However, however, the blanket statements often remain as blanket statements because having no practical impact, meaning not changing the specifics of what we do with regards to a specific commandment or interaction, they will often not be as vigorously debated and chased down to a finite conclusion as something will be followed, as, for example, in dealing with case law with regards to how somebody would be prosecuted for murder. That has many, many details because, of course, that has to be handled in a particular way and it has to be handled. Whereas the debates and discussions over exactly what Olam Haba, the world to come, will be like, well, that doesn't have the same degree of practical import. There will still be debate, there will still be discussion, but there will also be many unanswered, meaning unresponded to, volleys by different sages. The other thing you should understand is that the sages have a tendency to use hyperbole in different places, and sometimes it's not always clear, and different sages and different commentators will have different interpretations of where that is hyperbole and where it is meant literally. The other thing you need to know is that this section that we are beginning today is just the beginning. This section here taken from Masechet Sanhedrin, the section of Talmud that we are in, on page 90a. If you want to go to Sefaria, you can read in much more detail all of this section. This section continues for many, many pages, which is a long section in Talmud terms. The Talmud, despite it being a multi-volume work, is a relatively short work. And so when it spends this much time on a topic, we tend to take notice. Okay, so what is the topic we're going to look at? Well, the primary topic we're going to look at today is the idea of the proof texts regarding the resurrection of the dead. The idea that we will bodily come back to life at some point in the future. We'll get to that in a second of what they mean by that. But we're going to start off, as every major section of the Talmud does, with a piece of Mishnah. Remember, this is that earlier strata of compilation. And then going into the Gemara, into the later sages' analysis of what was meant by this piece. All right, hopefully that's enough of an introduction. If you are still unclear about the relationship between all of these different texts, contact me. I can send you links to books and other explanations of how this all works and what we expect to see in the different portions of our shared literary history. All right, so Mishnah first. All of the Jewish people, sorry, one more thing. We are using the Davidson translation, which is taken from Sefaria. Wonderful website. Please make sure that you support them. One of the things that the Davidson's translation, and indeed many of the modern translations, will do is they will bold their roughly direct translation of the passages that are in the Talmud itself, and then they will interpolate, they will add these additional explanatory passages, often drawn from the texts of Rashi, sometimes from other commentary, or sometimes just English language joining in order to make the flow of the passage readable to a modern English reader. So when you see it in bold, that's actually in the text. When you see it in the light, that was added by the commentary in order to give a quick explanation as well as make it more readable. So you could always take everything in the light font with a grain of salt. because it is one of many commentaries, and where I feel that it's overstating things, I'll be happy to point that out. But in general, I will read with the connective tissue because it does absolutely make it read more easily than doing it otherwise. All of the Jewish people, even sinners and those who are liable to be executed with a court-imposed death penalty, have a share in the world to come. All right, so first bold statement here, and bold both in terms of the text as well as in terms of the concept, is that every Jew has a share in the world to come. Now, this is fairly revolutionary for many different faith traditions, because many traditions have as a basic precept the idea that you earn a place in whatever they are calling heaven, whatever is next. Here, and the commentary in light font corroborates this, even people who have done horrible things, up to and including those guilty of a crime worthy of capital punishment, are considered to have a share in the world to come, that they are not disqualified from the next phase of our existence. And I'm going to hold off on defining world to come, because as we talked about in previous sessions, world to come can sometimes mean this world in its next phase of existence, and sometimes it can mean the next existence altogether beyond the material world that we are in, what might often be called a spiritual or heavenly existence. At the moment, the text has not made it clear which of those or both it has in mind. So at the moment, we'll just keep it as world to come. Now, as is common for Mishnah as well as Gemara, a proof text will be brought. This one coming from Isaiah. And your people also shall be all righteous. They shall inherit the land forever, the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, for my name is to be glorified. All right, so the import there of the text from Isaiah is that since this is all of us are considered righteous and all of us are inheriting the land forever, therefore the world to come must be available to all Jewish people. Now, very broad. Is it a hyperbolic statement? Well, the text itself is going to walk back exactly the limits of this, because they are going to explain that this is not actually an all statement, even though the word all was used in the original Mishnah text as well as in Isaiah quote. And these are the exception, meaning the people who have no share in the world to come, even when they fulfilled many mitzvot. So again, that even phrase there is an addition from the commentary. It is simply trying to clarify that this idea of having no share is not talking about how many mitzvahs you did, because that was already handled in the first passage, meaning that the basic entry into world to come is not guarded by a scorecard tallying mitzvot. Therefore, these exceptions have nothing to do with the performance of mitzvot either. So, who is it that is an exception that is considered not to have a share in the world to come? One who says, there is no resurrection of the dead derived from the Torah. So if you deny the idea of the resurrection of the dead, you do not get to have a share in Olam Haba, in the world to come. We're going to come back on that one in great detail, but I want to finish the passage before we do. And one who says the Torah did not originate from heaven, meaning that it has no divine origin at all, and an apikoros. Apikoros is translated in many different ways and implied in many different ways. It's generally adjacent to some form of theological heresy, but it's narrower than that. It's not just a broad definition. So we're going to leave apikoros because it's not our main focus today. Rabbi Akiva says, also included in the exception, so now apart from the three we've mentioned, we've got more. One who reads external literature. There was a very real concern about people who were reading and believing to the contradiction of Judaism, additional philosophies and theologies. And one who whispers invocations over a wound and says, as an invocation for healing, every illness that I placed upon Egypt, I will not place upon you, for I am the Lord your healer. So basically, he is talking about a version of faith healing here, where people are engaged in almost a ritualistic application of a verse as though that is going to be a talisman that will affect healing. And Rabbi Akiva is saying, nope, you do that and whoop, you're out of the world to come. Abba Shaul, another rabbi, says, also included in the exceptions is one who pronounces the ineffable name with its letters, meaning somebody who tries to read the Yud-He Vav-He and believes they are actually pronouncing the name of God. 3 prominent kings mentioned in the Bible and 4 prominent commoners who are described in the Bible as men of great wisdom have no share in the world to come. So now we're going to get some specific examples. We are not going to dwell on them much today, don't worry. But we'll see if we get to them later on in our studies. The 3 kings are Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and Ahab, both of whom were kings of Israel, and Manasseh, king of Judea. Rabbi Yehuda says, here's an argument. Manasseh has a share in the world to come, as it is stated concerning Manasseh, and he prayed to him, and he received his entreaty, meaning he prayed to God, and God answered, and heard his supplication, and brought him back to Jerusalem unto his kingdom. This seems to indicate that he repented wholeheartedly and effectively, and with the idea that that would allow him to fulfill a share in the world to come as well. The rabbis, meaning that the general group, responded to Rabbi Yehuda. They are arguing back. He regretted his actions, and his repentance was effective to the extent that God restored him to his kingdom. But God did not restore him to his share in the life in the world to come. So the argument there is that, yes, God accepted his teshuvah, but it was apparently not sufficient to restore his share in the world to come, only to restore his earthly situation, meaning it was not completely efficacious. Now, you'll already notice here that there is going to be an argument among the sages of how best to understand each of these ideas. We're going to focus today, as I mentioned at the outset, on the idea of the resurrection of the dead, in particular, its source texts, something that we didn't see much of when we talked about the texts from the prophets, finding a potential source in the work of Ezekiel, but as you mentioned, even that, it was hard to say just by itself without additional support what exactly Ezekiel was trying to prophesy. So here we're going to also see that in other topics as well, there will be arguments and division. But let's first finish off our Mishnah. The 4 commoners, meaning people who aren't royalty, are Balaam, son of Beor, Doeg, the Edomite, Ahitophel, and Gehazi, all of whom have amazingly interesting stories that are not going to be the focus of our discussion. Well, certainly not today. All right, Gemara. So now we get to the later sages who will begin analyzing the different pieces of what the Mishnah itself has said, and then add their own ideas into the mix. Now, this section is, like I said, very long, and I want to keep it long because I want you to see the length to which the discussion would go. But you will notice that there are some ellipses, the 3 dots. Those are indicating places where I made a decision to abbreviate the discussion, because the Talmud, in its blessed style, will include digressions, meaning to say it will move to an adjacent topic, sometimes for an extended period of time, before returning to the main flow that began that conversation. Now, those are incredibly useful, insightful, and worthwhile deviations. But for the purpose of this class, I really want to focus on the main idea of the resurrection of the dead. And as such, things that were not directly applicable or that were not so short that it was okay to include have been amended out. So by all means, please, as I always encourage, go to the original text, look it up for yourself, read the digressions. There is much to treasure and learn there, just not for us today in this class. All right. So let's see what the Gemara has to say. And why is one punished to the extent for saying that there is no resurrection of the dead derived from the Torah? Right? It's like, whoa, isn't this, pardon the expression, overkill? I mean, if somebody wanted to say, I believe in the resurrection of the dead, but I don't see it in the Torah, why would you bring out the big cannon and say, boom, you get no Olam Haba, you get no heaven? I mean, isn't that a little bit startling? The sages taught in a Braita. Braita, very quick explanation, is an additional piece of text taken from the teachings of the sages who lived in the time before or during the Mishnah's compilation, but for one reason or another did not end up in the actual Mishnah. They are still important, even if they are not considered as authoritative if they are in conflict with the Mishnah. But when the Mishnah doesn't explain something in more detail, a Braita is often brought as an important resource for helping to clarify something. And here, that is exactly what the rabbis are looking for. He denied the resurrection of the dead, therefore he will not have a share in the resurrection of the dead. As all measures dispensed by the Holy One, blessed be he, to his people are dispensed, measure for measure. Midah keneged midah. This idea of tit for tat, payback, as you did, so as you reap, so will you sow, or so as you sow, so will you reap. It is talking about an idea of a balanced response. And so the initial phrase here, which feels quite short, is actually doing a lot for us in understanding what we just read in the Mishnah, which is to say that if a person denies the resurrection of the dead, then they don't get the resurrection from the dead. Because why would you get what you had denied? You specifically targeted it with your belief or anti-belief, and therefore you will not benefit from it. Now, what this is doing beyond just giving us a neat explanation is it is also indicating that the beliefs that are being discussed here about the resurrection of the dead, about Olam Haba in general, about everything else, is really trying to guide us in how we approach and think about, well, God, and about God's impact on our lives, on the universe, and on everything before, during, and after our earthly existence. And that access to the future, in particular, which is the focus here, is dependent upon us actually believing there is a future, and that therefore it is incumbent upon us to develop our thoughts, our beliefs, our feelings on these topics in order to not just better understand them, but to truly access them. This is something that is in much more discussion in other portions, but it is begun here in this very simple way to remember: if you don't believe, you won't experience, which is an incredibly powerful and important thing to remember in many, many circumstances. Okay, but you are probably still wondering, well, where is the resurrection of the dead in the Torah? You may have noticed when we discussed the Tanakh texts in our last couple sessions that we didn't look at anything in the Torah itself related to the future of anything, any aspect of the end of days. That was very deliberate, partly because the phrasing in the Torah is very much not self-evident, as we will see, but also partly because I knew I wanted to bring this section of the Talmud where the rabbis will go to great lengths to give examples of the text, to explain why those examples work, and to argue about whether they work. So that is where we are. So let's go ahead and look at our first example. Rabbi Yochanan says, from where is the resurrection of the dead derived from the Torah? Now, notice he's asking a question. Now, it's a rhetorical question. He's going to provide an answer, but he is already responding to the fact that it would have been a common occurrence where somebody would ask, where is this from? Somebody would want to know where this is from. And notice that asking that question is not heretical. Even though the rabbis have said in the Mishnah, and then again confirmed in the Gemara, that you are supposed to acknowledge that resurrection for the dead comes from the Torah, asking where is not a rejection of that belief. It is a important exercise of developing our spiritual depth. And so each of the rabbis who are providing these explanations are doing so because we should know where, not merely that. We should know why the Torah gives us this idea and how it gives us this idea, not just say, oh, I know it's in the Torah because the rabbis told me so. It always asks more of us than simply signing on the dotted line. We're supposed to read the fine print. All right, so let's look at Rabbi Yochanan's explanation. It is derived from this verse, as it is stated with regards to Truma of the tithe, and you shall give the Truma of the Lord to Aaron, the priest, taken from Numbers 18. Now, Truma was one of the portions, the gift that was given to the Kohanim, and so that is what is being discussed in that section of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. And now we need to see how this is proof of the resurrection of the dead. And just as a reminder for those who maybe haven't looked at some of the earlier classes, when we talk about resurrection of the dead in this context, we are talking about a literal physical resurrection of the physical body of the deceased person. Not zombies, but actually being alive again. We'll get in other discussions. Well, let me take the time. Probably not today. Maybe we'll see of what that looks like. But the basic idea of living a life, part two, in this world is what we're talking about. So, how is the giving of Truma to the Kohanim proof that that exists, that there will be a physical extra life? Well, the rhetorical question comes, and does Aaron exist forever? Meaning, so that one can fulfill the mitzvah by giving him the Truma of the tithe? So the verse literally says that we, the Jewish people, for all time, are meant to give the Truma to Aaron. Well, if we're supposed to, all of us, give the Truma to Aaron, then Aaron needs to be there as the person to accept the gift of the Truma that we're giving. And Aaron's not all around, right? Because Aaron is not immortal. He is not sitting somewhere in Israel right now waiting to accept Truma. So therefore, we can't do this, even though it said we're supposed to. So, but is it not so that Aaron did not enter Eretz Israel? Even more importantly, the only place where the people would give him Truma. So we're told even the generation of Aaron himself, the generation who left Egypt and were about to enter the land of Israel, they were told to give it to Aaron, and yet they never made it to Israel with Aaron. Aaron died before we left the wilderness. So there was never a moment when we could fulfill this mitzvah as it appears to be written. Now, obviously, many people will interpret this mitzvah to mean we give it to the sons of Aaron, we give it to the Kohanim in general when we get to Israel and we're able to do so. But that's not exactly what the verse said. And the rabbis here are looking, Rabbi Yochanan in particular, are looking at the details of the verse and finding that it doesn't quite measure up, and that gives room for a rather important interpretation. And that interpretation is, rather the verse teaches that Aaron is destined to live in the future, and the Jewish people will give him Truma. From here it is derived that the resurrection of the dead is from the Torah. Problem solved. Okay, so I am not a betting man, but I am still willing to wager a modest sum that there are at least many of you who are unconvinced by this proof text. That looking at the explanation that the Torah told us to give Truma to Aaron, Aaron was never in the land of Israel where Truma is given. Therefore, at some point in the future, Aaron has to be alive again so we can actually do what the Torah said, is not convincing you of the resurrection of the dead. That you do not find that a compelling argument. What you want is probably a nice, shiny verse, preferably with some lights and maybe a little fireworks in the background, where the Torah says, and behold, the end of days will come, and God will bring everybody back to life, including Aaron, and then you can give him Truma, and yada, 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 and it'll be exactly this, that, and the other. Although, I hate to burst your bubble, but we're not going to find that verse. Such a verse does not exist in the Torah. But that is the nature of how the Torah was written. The Torah was written in a way that focused first and foremost on what we needed to know for the moment that we were living in, whether that was during the time of the Israelites or in our entry to Israel or into the modern world. And as we talked about in our very first class, this definitely gives a tilt when we're reading the Torah, that if it wasn't written explicitly in the thou shalt or thou shalt not language, that it must not have been very important to the Torah. And it is true that Judaism focuses on what we're doing now for its own sake, doing the mitzvot because they were commanded, not because we are trying to earn some reward or avoid some punishment in some nebulous concept of an afterlife. That is all true. But it is also true that that reading, meaning that if it's not explicit, it's not important, is a misunderstanding of how the Torah itself was written, how the ancient texts in general, not only our own, were written, but even those of other ancient countries, which is to say, there was always an expectation that the reader, usually with the assistance of the scholars of their day, would find more in the text than just what was grossly explicit. And this is a beautiful example that here we have a verse that is talking about the gift of Truma, something that many people find rather dull and uninteresting. And yet, if you read it carefully, you will notice that it is giving a nod to the concept of physical resurrection of the dead. Now, because it is still not a slam dunk for many, many people, you will not be surprised to find that the remainder of this document, and more besides, because I had to limit how much I would be trying to bring in our first couple sessions on this topic, will be continued and alternative explanations for this concept of the resurrection of the dead. Does that mean that Rabbi Yochanan was wasting his time? Does that mean that there isn't a singular perfect explanation? The answer, of course, is no, because each of us will find an explanation, a source text that will work for us, that will resonate, that will capture our understanding in a way that is wonderful and perfect, because, well, God has created the Torah that can speak to all of us in the way we need to be spoken. And each sage that brings their own explanation, such as Rabbi Yochanan here, is trying to help us in that process. And each of them understands that what they are sharing is not going to be the final word on the subject, that other people will also need to add to the body of knowledge, to the explanations, to the clarifications in order to help different individuals to reach this same level of understanding. Rabbi Yochanan is just one version, but it's a great starting version because it is getting us into the basic process by which this works, which is to find a text that may not on the surface look like it has much to say about the topic, but when examined carefully, as we should examine every part of Torah, we will find that it is dripping with meaning. All right, let's do a little more of this with some additional phrases. It is taught in a Braita. Remember, that's that parallel text that Rabbi Simai says, from where is the resurrection of the dead derived from the Torah? All right, same question. Here's our answer. It is derived from a verse, as it is stated with regard to the patriarchs. This is from Exodus 6. I have also established my covenant with them, meaning the Avot, the patriarchs themselves, to give to them the land of Canaan, to give them the land of Canaan. Now, careful reading, as the commentary points out, the phrase to give to you the land of Canaan is not stated, as the meaning of the verse, is not that God fulfilled the covenant with the patriarchs when he gave the land of Canaan to the children of Israel. Rather, it is stated to give to them the land of Canaan, meaning the patriarchs themselves. Now, you'll notice that in the original Talmud text, this was jumping from short phrase to short phrase to short phrase. That is the way the Talmud was written, and it's why the commentary comes in to fill in the blanks to make it easier for a modern reader. But let me make sure that we've got the understanding here. When God is reporting what he had done by establishing the covenant. He said that he had made a covenant with them, meaning Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that God would give them, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the land of Canaan. Now, as is common, the Talmud, Mishnah, and Jewish thought in general would explore the alternatives. And the alternative here is that God could have said that he had made a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to give to you, Moses and the Israelites, the land of Canaan. The same way that I could make a promise to my friend to give his son some benefit. Well, that isn't what was said. And since that isn't what was said, there must have been a reason why what was said, why the word to them, meaning to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob themselves, was mentioned, rather than to you, meaning Moses and the Israelites of that time. All right, hopefully you've got that. So what is the meaning? Well, the meaning is that the gift of Canaan would go actually to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because from here, this to them wording is derived that the resurrection of the dead is from the Torah. How so? Commentary explains for us, as in the future, the patriarchs will come to life and inherit the land. All right. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will, at some point, when the resurrection happens, be around to actually enjoy being in the land as was finally accomplished through the gift, through the fulfillment of the covenant. They themselves will get to experience it. And that is a beautiful concept. And in my opinion, it is incredibly touching. The idea that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, each in their own way, lived in very flawed versions of the land of Canaan, what we call Israel, that each of them had troubles and turmoil with their neighbors, with the elements, with themselves, and were never able to secure permanently and peacefully the fullness of that covenant, of that covenantal promise of the land. And therefore, in the future, they'll get to it. Abraham will actually get to be there in the land of Israel completely at peace, and so to Isaac, and so to Jacob. So the idea here is that since God made a promise to them, they are going to have to be around to receive it in order to be given, in order for God to fulfill that promise. And that means they're going to have to be alive again, physically in the land, and thus resurrection of the dead established from that promise. Again, some of you might not find that the most slam dunk explanation. That's okay. We're not done. As a matter of fact, Sadi Dalet, Sadi Dalet Kuf, Gimel Mem, Gimel Shem Mem, Kuf Mem. This is meant to be a mnemonic where if you remembered these clusters of letters, you would remember the sequence of explanations that we are about to start. The same way that there is a mnemonic for remembering the order of the 10 plagues, this was in the Haggadah. This is a mnemonic that is meant to help you remember the various attempts to explain the proofs of the proofs of the resurrection of the dead from the Torah itself. So I'm not going to go through and show you how each one of them maps. That's something you can do if you're comfortable with the Hebrew and Aramaic, but we are going to go through the actual proofs. So here we start with a proof with a very popular format. Heretics asked Rabban Gamliel. In this section of the Talmud, we get many of these types of interactions where someone, often identified as a heretic, sometimes identified as a Sadducee, sometimes identified as Romans. These are people that would often have different opinions on what Judaism was saying, or just in general what they thought God or gods wanted for the world. And while they didn't always argue with us about things like keeping Shabbat or celebrating our holidays or other aspects, when it came to this theology, we got a lot more interaction. And therefore, we are going to see more of them come onto the stage for these discussions. So here we have generic heretics, people who clearly don't believe in the concept of the resurrection of the dead, and they are going to give Rabban Gamliel some grief on this. From where is it derived that the Holy One, blessed be he? Notice they still worship God and they're still being respectful, but they deny the resurrection. Where is it proved that God revives the dead? Rabban Gamliel said to them that this matter can be proven from the Torah, from the prophets, and from the writings. But they did not accept the proofs from him. So that's our opening statement. And now we're going to get the case studies, each one in turn, Torah, prophet, writing, and their rejection involved. So let's see how Rabban Gamliel tries to prove it and their response. The proof from the Torah is as it is written. And the Lord said to Moses, behold, you shall lie with your fathers and arise. Deuteronomy 31:16. The heretic said to him, this is their rejection, but perhaps the verse should be divided in a different manner, and it should be read, behold, you shall lie with your fathers, stop, and this people will arise and stray after foreign gods of the land. All right, so he says, look, Deuteronomy 31 says, Moses, you're going to die, and you'll arise. And they're responding, no, you put the comma in the wrong place. It should be, Moses, you're going to die, comma, hard concept change, the people will arise and stray after foreign gods. Is the arising that is happening here happening to Moses when he is dead, or is it to the people when they are rising up to rebel? And honestly, you can't officially say one way or the other. Yes, we in our tradition have ways of trying to determine which reading is more accurate, but from somebody that is outside the community, somebody who wants to reject our tradition of interpretation, well, they can stick a comma and believe themselves right. It's one of the reasons why we need tradition when we are analyzing anything. Well, let's go on to our second proof. The proof from the prophets is as it is written, your dead shall live, my corpse shall arise, awake and sing, you that dwell in the dust, for your dew is as the dew of vegetation, and the land shall cast out the dead, taken from Isaiah 26. All right, so on the surface of it, seems very much talky about the dead coming back to life. Your dead shall live, all right? And the corpse arise, and it's like the dew that brings the vegetation back to life. It looked like it was dead, and now it's alive again. The land shall cast out the dead. I mean, this all seems very much on the nose. But the heretic said to him, but perhaps the prophecy was fulfilled with the dead that Ezekiel revived. Therefore, no proof may be cited from that verse with regard to any future resurrection. So here, they're taking a different tactic. In the Torah verse, their tactic was, I read that verse differently. Here, they are taking the tactic of, I read that verse as fulfilled. So yes, that happened, but having happened, it has no relevancy for the future. Proof from the writings is as it is written, and your palate is like the best wine that glides down smoothly for my beloved, moving gently the lips of those that sleep. So Song of Songs seems to indicate this idea of moving gently the lips of those that sleep, the idea that the dead will ultimately rise and speak, meaning the lips of those that sleep being a euphemism for those that are dead. And indeed, we often see that metaphor. The heretic said to him, but perhaps merely their lips will move in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. As Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehotzadak, anyone whose name in Halakha is stated in this world, his lips move in the grave, as if repeating the statement cited in his name, as it is stated, moving gently the lips of those that sleep. Therefore, no proof may be cited from that verse, as it is unrelated to resurrection. All right, so the argument on the section from the writings, the section from Shir Shirim, Song of Songs, is really fascinating because they are objecting to his interpretation that the lips moving of those that are sleeping as being an idea for full-bodied resurrection. Instead, they are using a counter argument derived from another rabbi's teaching, in this case, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai that is talking about how when you share teachings from somebody's in somebody's name and their legacy, and that person happens to be dead, their lips move in the grave, for which he did use this proof text, that moving gently the lips of those that sleep. So they're saying, since Rabbi Shimon used this proof text to say that when you share words in the name of somebody who has taught you that has now passed, it's their lips are moving in the grave, that verse is not available to prove the resurrection of the dead. So what has happened here is more than just a proof and a rejection, proof and a rejection, proof and a rejection. Is we have had three different proofs and three very different forms of rejection. We had a rejection based upon, I don't read it that way. We had a rejection based upon the timeline. I reject the idea that that was unfulfilled. It's been fulfilled in Ezekiel's time, which did come after Isaiah, and therefore it's no longer relevant. And then the third rejection is the most interesting in my opinion, because they are rejecting it based upon rabbinic criteria, which is to say that verse has already been used for a different purpose, and as such it is not acceptable or available to be used for this purpose, and therefore you would have to find a different explanation. Now, the other thing we have to ask ourselves, so are these good faith arguments on both sides? Was Rabban Gamliel giving a good faith explanation from each of these? I believe the answer was yes, that he legitimately believes that each one of these, according to Jewish belief and practice and tradition, are rightfully interpreted to mean that there will be a resurrection of the dead in the future. However, the counter arguments show something very interesting, because we would normally expect that a heretic would say, that's not proof for me because I don't accept your Torah. I mean, after all, if I don't accept the rejection, the resurrection of the dead, why would I accept the Torah? Now, that can be countered to say, well, maybe these heretics were the Samaritans, because the Samaritans accept the Torah, but they reject the rest of the Tanakh. They reject all of rabbinic literature. But then we have heretics in the second version that are accepting the prophets. And in fact, they are saying that Isaiah was a true prophet because he properly prophesied that there would be a resurrection in the day of Ezekiel. And that prophecy having come true, it proves Isaiah right, but it also disqualifies that prophecy for the future. So they cannot be Samaritans because they are accepting the valid prophecy of Isaiah in their rebuttal to this concept of the resurrection of the dead. And you might be saying, therefore, well, maybe they were Sadducees. Maybe they were from among the group of people who accepted Torah and accepted the rest of Tanakh, but did not accept the oral Torah. They don't accept the idea that there was a tradition of explanation that was being shepherded by the rabbis that was essential for how we interpret the text. And what do we get? Well, our third explanation is rejected on rabbinic grounds. It's rejected according to the rabbinic style. These are people who accept that the rabbis will find a verse, will uncover the meaning of that verse, and once that verse has been used for that new meaning, it is not available for use for something else, unless they wish to argue about it, but that requires a different level of argumentation. So they're not Sadducees. They're accepting the teachings of one rabbi and using it to counter the teachings of a different rabbi. And that means that when we wonder who are these heretics that are involved in this discussion, these have to be some other group very akin to the rabbis themselves. Now, which group was that? Unfortunately, we don't know. Could it have been a Pharisaic sect? Quite possibly. The Pharisees are often erroneously equated on a one-to-one basis with the rabbis themselves, which is not a fair reading of the history. The rabbis themselves criticized the Pharisees in some places, but they also clearly had a common cause in protecting the idea of a tradition of how the Torah should be interpreted. So it could have been a Pharisaic sect. It could have been another group that were closely aligned with the rabbis, but rejected this one point. We know that this topic of the resurrection of the dead was extremely controversial in the days of the Second Temple and early rabbinic period. We know that because, well, we've got a lot of pages where they're talking about it. We also know that because it was deliberately implanted within the Amidah, which became the sort of calling card of rabbinic worship, right within prayer number 2, Gevurot, multiple times, so that nobody who was of the heretical mindset that there was no such thing as the resurrection of the dead would be able in good faith to get up and chant the prayer, the Amidah, to lead the community. They would out themselves by the second paragraph when they skipped all the references to the resurrection of the dead. So there was clearly a division and an argument within the early rabbinic leadership on this topic. And the rabbis that continued and succeeded and whose legacy we are still a descendant of, felt it necessary to go over this topic in great detail and to ensure that we recognize this as being a critical concept. This is one of the reasons why, if we go back to that original Mishnah, the rabbi said that somebody who denies this has no share in the world to come. The reason why this would be first in that list is because in their day, this was a topic that divided even people that were otherwise committed to the rabbinic project, to the idea that indeed the Torah could outlast the Temple of Jerusalem, that indeed we were still able to serve God, that there were people who were in agreement on that, but on this topic and a few others were in sharp disagreement. We'll talk about that, I think, at another time, but for the moment, we're going to leave it here. And then next week, we will pick up with the continued discussion of the proofs that the rabbis will bring for the resurrection of the dead. Many more from the Torah itself, and then others from other sections of Tanakh, as well as from logic itself. With that, I will bid you all a wonderful good day and hope to see you all again very soon and continue your studies. Take care.